B-O-Y-C.
William between parentheses Bill, mostly called Bill.
Yeah, okay.
Bill Boyce. Most of them know me by Bill Boyce.
Yeah. So this is March 21st, 1984. Joe Todd, and interview with William Boyce, B-O-Y-C-E.
William or Bill Boyce. William or Bill Boyce.
Okay. Sir, where were you born?
I was born near Magnolia, Arkansas, September 13th, 1899. Born in the 19th century.
Who was your father?
My father was James Robert Boyce.
Where is he from?
Well, his ancestors come from South Carolina. Well, I guess he was raised in mostly Arkansas and Texas. Seemed like some of his descendants, they did come from Texas into Arkansas.
Was he born in
Arkansas? The Boyces first, they came into South Carolina, the old way back.
Now, was he born in Arkansas?
Yeah, I would say he's born in Arkansas.
Yeah. Who was your mother?
Mother was a Jones. Her name is Emma. Emma Jones.
Was she from Arkansas?
Pardon?
Was she from Arkansas also?
A Jones?
Yeah.
My mother's father, Arkansas.
Yeah, okay.
His name was Pinckney B. Jones. He used to be a legislator in Arkansas way back when he served a term in the legislature. Now, Emma Jones, my mother, there's 11 boys and 1 girl, 12 in that family. Some of them died young. I never did see some of the uncles, but I've known quite a few of them. Now, one of the uncles is J.D. Jones. He was superintendent of the Wright City mill. That's what brought me over to Oklahoma when I quit the farm down in Arkansas. I came out there and started sawmilling.
Yeah. Now, was your father a farmer?
Yeah, farmer. Yeah, cotton and corn.
So you cotton farmer?
Cotton farmer and corn.
How much?
Yeah, we owned our own place. It wasn't this third and fourth deal, you know.
Yeah.
We owned the place.
How much cotton could you pick in a day?
Oh Lord, let's see. I think I could pick about. Now we picked it clean then. We didn't pull it. We picked it clean. You had to pick it clean. You couldn't get a good price for it. We had to get everything we could out of that little damn land. So I could pick about 125 pounds a day. That's about all.
Was the gin in Magnolia, the cotton gin?
No, the cotton gin was right there in the neighborhood, just up the road about, I'd say about 1.5 miles.
How big was your farm?
Oh, well, we had originally, but what we was farming was about 80 acres. All told, after we got it cleared. Well, we started out there on about 60 acres. Put on some more after these boys got big enough to clear it off.
How long did you live there on the farm?
Well, I moved up to the farm. My daddy worked at a little sawmill. He drove he had a team. He owned a team. He just drove. He hauled lumber from a little sawmill when we lived down there in a little old town in Arkansas somewhere. And then he finally made enough money to make a down payment. He found this is federal land he bought up here in Arkansas. And it's right close to where my granddaddy lived. And this stuff was on this federal land deal, you know. There's a land bank in St. Louis on that. And I think it was priced at $1.25 an acre. So he made that and made payments on it the rest of his days, I think. Finally got it paid out.
And when did your uncle become supervisor of the Wright City mill?
Well, that uncle of mine, he worked in he went from home down into South Texas, and then he finally went to Washington, the state of Washington, worked a while up there. Then when this lumber company opened up over here at Broken Bow, he came to Broken Bow as shipping clerk. He was shipping clerk over here at this mill during the early days, I'd say back in 1915 or 16, somewhere. I know my daughter, not my daughter, but my sister came out here and went to school here in Broken Bow and stayed up at his place there about, I think, during one school year.
Yeah.
And that was here at Broken Bow in 1916, I believe.
Now, was that Dirks?
That was when Dirks, he worked at Dirks then. And then he went from here, he moved to, I don't know the exact year, he went to Wright City as superintendent, and he went down there to Wright City, and that was before, I went there in 1920, and he was superintendent then. I imagine he went to Wright City about 1918.
Yeah. When did Dirks open up here?
In Broken Bow?
Well, in Oklahoma. When did they first come here?
Well, now, when they first came to Oklahoma, I just reading a piece back there. At 19 and, I think the first mill logging operation started at Wright City in 1909. 1909 when they first started that. They had to build, the first thing they had to do, of course their first thing they done is come over here and buy some land from the Indians, Jim Campbell and a guy from the Queen, Matt Allen. They come in here and bought land. And I was reading a little piece back there how they bought the land. They had a horse and buggy and a cook and an interpreter. John C. Tonecker, this old Indian, was with the interpreter where he'd go to these Indians. And the Indians knew Jim Campbell, J.M. Campbell, and Matt Allen. They knew Campbell better because he'd been up in here a long time. And they didn't have much trouble with the Indians. The Indians kind of liked them. So they didn't have any trouble. They bought a lot of this land then. Well, land then, that's just up here in the mountains and rocks and nothing. Well, they figured land wasn't worth anything then. Well, it wasn't. No way to handle it. Timber's in the way, no farming land. So they bought a lot of that stuff, I imagine, for 50, 60 cents an acre. I wouldn't say I don't know the exact price, but I know it was real cheap. So they bought a lot of, so that when they bought the timber, the next thing to do is they had in mind this sawmill business they're going to open up in Oklahoma. So they started out in 1909, started construction on the Wright City mill down at Wright City. And as soon as they started construction on the railroad, building the railroad out. They built the railroad, they had to build a railroad to get the machinery into Wright City to build the mill. So I just read now, I think S.B. McCartney was the superintendent building that railroad in there. He had I read a little book back there at Dale they got a lot of information on that. And they built that out here in 1909. Now they were supposed to start up in 1910 on July the 4th. I just reading that in a little book. On July the 4th, 1910, supposed to saw the first line, but they had a little difficulty and they couldn't start that day. So it was put off, and on July the 13th, 1910, they sawed the first line. The first log went through the sawmill at Wright City. And they saved the, excuse me. You haven't got a Kleenex, no. I knew I can get the coffee. They saved the sawdust. Oh, shoot. They saved the sawdust. They put it in a jar as a memento. I think they took it to Kansas City, but I don't know what they ever done with that jar of sawdust. So they started that mill in 19, and then in 1911, they started building this mill here at Broken Bow. And it started up, I remember 1912, just before I retired, I went up into the attic where some of the old records were stored, and I was looking around and found some of the first bookwork when they started this plant here in 1912. And some of the first invoices of lumber, I was looking at what a carload of lumber costs. Some of it about $200 and $300 for a carload of lumber. A lot of it was around $10 a thousand. Now you could buy that stuff for $250 or $300 a thousand.
What happened to those books?
All that burnt up. They threw them, burnt it when they took over. I think they destroyed every bit of that stuff. A bunch of old, I wish I'd have kept some of that. It was stored up there in the top of the office. Even some of the original records. Matt Cook, I think, was the first office manager. And I was looking at some of the books where he'd done some of his, where he put down how much it sold this day and how much the labor cost. He had the ledgers and everything right there. Looking at some of the prices, and I wish I'd have kept some of that stuff. That'd sure been something to look at, the way things sell today.
Yeah. And what was the duties of your uncle at the mill? You say he was supervisor?
He was superintendent down at Wright City, plant superintendent.
And what were his duties?
His duties was, well, the orders were passed from headquarters down to him. He relayed the report, and he had to see that the mill kept running, you see, and watch production. See that there, and see he had a bunch of foremen under him, and each foreman had a certain duty to perform. and he supervised all of his work was done through the foreman, you see. And they would come over and maybe have meetings and they'd straighten things out.
Okay. When they first started the Wright City mill, how'd they get the logs from the woods to the mill?
Well, now when they first started the mill, they'd done a lot of it by a log team, logging, just mules and oxen. Now the oxen, they use them that's built right there in that river bottom. And they could use oxen down there at the bottom, get that hard, well, most of the stuff then was pine and maybe some softwoods. I don't know whether they cut too many hardwood at that mill, but I know they cut some cypress. Well, a lot of that timber was right there close. They could haul it in, and of course they laid a track out. The first thing they had to do, put in a spur. I think they run one out back north and one east, some of the same old right-of-way they got now on the T-O&E. And it was all hauled in by log car. Train. A lot of it was hauled in by train. They'd run the train up and dump them in the pond. They had a pond then. They'd run that stuff up and dump it in the pond. But a lot of that stuff then was hauled. Now they had those old-timey log wagons in, mules, and they had to skid them things up to the poles. You ever see them loading that stuff, pictures of it?
No.
No, you put your log down. Now, for instance, they wanted to roll one of these big logs up on top of that wagon. You done that with you had two mules over there, mostly mules, horses, mostly mules. They were good loggers. You had these two mules, and you reached back down here to this log was laying here on a kind of two skid poles. And then you roll that right up on top of the truck. They pulled it with a chain, hook the chain back under the truck like this, come around the log, and then the mule moves forward. And that just rolled the log right up on these two skids up on top of the truck. And they just kept piling them on top of one another and chaining them down into the mill. A lot of that was hauled right to the mill. Then as soon as they got it cut out around close to the mill, they hauled to the track then. They just hauled the track out in the woods. For several years, that was done. It was a long time before they disbanded the railroad. I remember when they tore that track up. Everything now is hauled by truck right direct to the mill.
It is?
Everything. All this warehouse stuff and Dirks too back then. I remember when they tore up that last track from here to up around the old mill, up around Cleveland or somewhere.
When did they begin the first management program, Dirks?
What?
When did Dirks begin the first forest management program?
Oh, well, let's see, I can't remember just exactly. Seems like it's in the 50s somewhere.
In the 50s?
I'm not sure. They've got the record in there, I'm sure, on that. Old John got that. You can get that from him.
You started working in the mill?
I started to work in the mill at Wright City, out in the mill there. I started to work first, just doodling blocks around. I didn't know anything about sawmilling.
Yeah. What year was that?
That was, I started to work February the 2nd, 1920, down at Wright City. Now at Wright City, the company owned the store. They had a hotel and a place to eat, a hotel and the eating place there. So if you're a single man coming in there, you had a place to eat, sleep, and you could trade over at the store. And your time went into the store, kept a record on what you earned, and they turned in this board bill every day over there to the timekeeper. I think it was $1 a day then, board and room. I know that's what I paid. And it went in over there. And this old boy, the timekeeper, if you go in at a trade and want to buy something, he'd have to check your wages against what you'd spent, so be sure you had it. You want to buy something, you want to be sure you had the money for it before we let you have it now. They had them a casket deal up there. Them old boys, you'd trade down here and they'd slip that back up there, and they'd tell you whether it was okay right away, you know. And
World War One. What were you doing in World War One?
World War I was working here in Broken Bow.
What were you doing?
I was invoice clerk, but I was 45 years old. I just missed it by a little.
No, World War One.
Oh, no, World War
17 and
I.
18.
No, wait a minute. Sure, that was in 1918. I was drafted in World War I, and I was in Kansas City. I went to Kansas City. I kind of like the automobile business. I liked food and mechanics. So I went to an automobile school in Kansas City in 1918. Went up there and took a course in automobiles. It was in 1918. Let's see, I was classified when I was up there. I got my classification card up there in 1918. I think I remember getting it. Yeah, 1918. You see, they registered when I was 18 the year before. I was 19 years old when I was up there. Anyway, I got my A1 call up there, getting ready to call me. But the thing ended while I was in Kansas City. We got a false alarm, and somewhere back there, just before the real alarm, I know they had a big blowout and deal there. It wasn't the real. It was back in October, September sometime. I know they had a false alarm on it, because I wasn't there when it. Not November 11th when it actually ended.
What did you do on Armistice Day when you found out the war had really ended?
Now let's see, where was I at Armistice Day? Well, I was back at home in that was in
November 11th.
That'd have to be November 11th, 1918. I was back at home in Arkansas, and I wasn't doing much of nothing. In fact, we didn't have a radio and stuff at home then. And didn't even have a telephone in 1918. We had all we could do is wait till the newspaper came out. And he said it big headlines on the Arkansas Gazette.
But you said that there was a false alarm up in Kansas City?
I was not in Kansas City. The false alarm, they had a big blowout up there.
What'd you do up there? What was that blowout like?
Oh, I don't know what all they did do there. I don't remember. Seemed like a bunch went out to Swope Park. They had a big deal. A lot of airplanes flowing around out there. Forget just what all we did do. But anyway, I was up there tonight when that first false alarm came in. But I was at home during the other one, and we didn't have much communication then. All we could tell was when it came out in the paper, nobody but just home folks. We just had a worrying, and that's all there was to it.
When did you decide to come to Wright City? You came here in 1920.
When I came back from school as a mechanic, I went to work in a garage in Camden, Arkansas. I worked down in 1990. I worked down there during that. I came back in September, and I went to work down there in the garage in Camden. I worked there until the spring of the year, and then I came back out to the farm, helped my dad with the farm during 1919. Well, in 1920, I decided to leave the farm and head out some other direction. My uncles was working down there. He was superintendent at Wright City, so I said, well, maybe he can get me a job out there. So I went out there, and sure enough, about the next day after I got there, he took me out to foreman, and signed me up, and I went to work about the next day.
What was your first job?
The first job was, had these big old boxes out there, doodling. You see these cut-off saws had little blocks of wood. You cut them off. And they had boxes out here on the tram. You go out and dump that cut-offs in a box. Well, that's what I was doing the first thing when I was there.
Yeah, why'd you cut these blocks off for? What was the reason?
Well, it was a defect in the end of the lumber. Maybe you had a split in here or had bark on it. See, well, you cut that little old piece off there, and then you got a number one or maybe a high grade of lumber. Cut that little piece off the end. There's bark out there on the end of it, about halfway, or split, or big knots, different kind of knots. Cut that off and throw it in the box. A lot of them hauled that away to burn for wood, heat. And a lot of it went back to they had a big old burner for a lot of it, just burnt the stuff.
How was the plant powered? Steam powered?
It was powered by steam.
How were the saws hooked up to the?
It was when I went there, it was electric motors. But first it was just an old big engine and a line shaft. It had the planing mill and everything run off of that big engine. Had a good big engine pull on the line shaft went straight on down to. But I think that mill burned. I know it did, and when they rebuilt it, it was all electric. Put in a electric turbine over here at the powerhouse. Then all this was electric. Everything was electric. The bandsaw and everything pulled an electric motor. Had a big electric motor for the bandsaw. And then all the machines were electric. That's what I was doing down there for about a year and a half, feeding one of them big machines.
When it was steam, did they have belts coming off that shaft to the saw blades?
Yeah, they had belts. When it was steam, they had this big old drive wheel down there in the engine room. It run a big wide belt. Some of them were about 30 inches wide, down to this drive pulley that pulled the shaft. Then you put on a different size pulley to speed up each machine just like you wanted. Now those bandsaws, they had to get up and move to cut that line through there. But they used steam. There was a steam carriage. Had that steam deal where you push these sawyers guide that you push through the long way steam.
Now that's the carriage that carries
the carriage and go back and forth, and that was handled by steam.
What's that carriage called?
Well, it's just a carriage.
Just a carriage?
Just a carriage, a long carriage.
Mr. Burwell mentioned.
Yeah, it was a carriage.
He mentioned.
And they used to have 3 men working on that carriage. Then later on, it got down to 1 man. The sawyer could do all that automatically later on. But when I came there, you had a man on each end dogging what they call doggers, head dogger and back dogger, and the block setter.
And what do they do?
The block setter had to set, the sawyer give a sign to the block setter what he was wanting to cut. And when he give a sign to say he wanted to cut 1.25 inch stuff, you had to set that so this last line would come out on about either inch, I think 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches is close as they could cut that last line. It used to be about 2 inches, but they got that down where them dogs had to hold that last board there, about 1.5. And you had to set the block so it'd come out. You had to make that calculation so this line would be 1.5 inch, that last line.
Now the dogs.
You got to know what to do when you started in way up here to come out right down here. That's the block setter. But the sawyer give the block setter a sign what he's going to cut for. Say, I want to cut 2x4s. I want to cut so many of this and so many of that. And he had to know where to set over here to start to come out down here on 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches.
You know, the dogs, is that a clamp that holds the log?
Just a clamp. It's a big thing, just clamp like this. down here was a solid line, this
Yeah.
dog catch.
Okay.
It went up, these things are upright, all kind of like, see, they stand upright like that.
Yeah.
Now you see, here's the line back in here, these dogs, there's a little hole, you might say like that. And that dog clamped this thing, and this line here's the board passing along like this. See that? The dog clamped that little thing in there and held it.
How fast did the carriage move in front of the saw blade?
Well, I don't know. It moved about, I don't know just how fast, but it moved pretty fast. I couldn't tell you the speed exactly, but it didn't take long to cut a line there. Just zzz, about like that on a 20-foot log.
Yeah. How did they turn the log?
They turned it by steam, oh, now what do they call them things? It's a deal that's built into the carriage. It's done with the sawyer turns the log.
Now, Mr.
He turned that log.
Burwell called, he called the carriage a steam nigger?
A steam nigger.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know exactly whether it's called a steam nigger or not.
Well, have you heard of the term steam nigger?
No, that's always a carriage.
Okay.
That's a carriage. Now he might have, now that's a steam cylinder that drives that rod that pulls that carriage is steam.
Okay, but how did they turn the log when the
That
mill
was
first opened?
That was a control built in that was built on the deck. You kicked it off on the deck, see the deck, and it had those things built in the deck, and they were operated by steam. And this sawyer kicked him, he could flip them things over, he'd kick them up and turn that log over.
So they had that when the mill first opened?
Yeah, they had that. Well, now, I don't know when the mill first opened. I think they used to have they might have had somebody on deck that helped turn them logs at the beginning. I wasn't here when they started.
Yeah, okay.
But I know when I was in the 1920s, they was turning it with steam. It's built into the deck. See, the big deck up here where these logs roll down. See, if you come in up on it and roll down, here's your saw line right along here. That deck, and these things are built right in, and you see when you flip them up, well, you kick them things off and turn them over. You had to turn them over a lot of times, change sides with it. You want to turn it down, start cutting on the other side.
Okay, how long did you work at cutting the end of the logs off? You said you were just cutting the blocks off.
Oh, cutting them on blocks?
Yeah.
Oh, I worked at that about 3 months, and then went to feed the machine.
What machine were you feeding?
Well, I started out for feeding, just one of the, I think I was running, I wasn't a sizer. I was just running the machine like just ordinary boards, like 1x6s, 1x4s, stuff like that. It's just a planing machine. It wasn't there. Now feeding a flooring machine, you kind of got to know what you're doing. You got to learn how to turn that board. And a beginner can't do that. You got to have a little experience knowing which way to turn that board, put it in. If you turn it the right way, you got to have the right side up. Get the knots on the right side. So it takes a little experience to feed a flooring machine.
Is that what you make floorboards with?
Yeah, well, it's not this kind of stuff. The flooring, you've seen it used to be 3/8 and 4/8, about 4/8 size. 4-inch flooring. You've seen the regular flooring?
Mm-hmm.
Hardwood floors.
Wood floors, yeah.
So that's different to this stuff here. This looks like
this pine?
This pine looks like, I don't know if that's tongue and groove stuff or what this is here. It looks like just regular boards. Mm-hmm. Anyway, you got to know just what you're doing feeding that flooring machine. I was feeding one just putting regular 4 sides, like 1x4s, 1x6, 1x8, just 4 sides, just regular lumber. Yeah. It's easy to feed that machine, not too much trouble. Mm-hmm. Just throw it through there. Either side of that board is, you grade, and then the grader could grade it from which way it came out on the back side, regular boards and dimension. Mm-hmm. And I fed that machine a while, and then I went down to the sizer. Now that sizer, man, that's a high-speed machine. One time I run a load of They were 2x6s, 12 foot long. We had a speed of 500 foot a minute. And we run a carload of those 2x6s in about an hour and 30 minutes. I had that car loaded out there, 25,000 feet. One time that board came through and hooked that old grade table and pushed it almost out into the box cars. These box cars are running right along close by behind the machines where you load it out.
Mm-hmm. Now size or just size
Well,
of the
that
boards?
board, while they're coming out, just like falling off that thing, just like that, I had to, boy, you had to put them on there just about like that.
Now what exactly does the size of the machine do?
All right, it dresses it 4 sides. See, 1x6 in that day was 1 5/8 by 5 5/8. Oh, that's in that day. The size of a 1x6 after it was plain, after it was dressed, 4 sides. It dressed bottom and top, and each edge cut a. The width is 5 5/8, and is 1 5/8 thick in 1920. But they've changed that a lot since then. About 1 3/4 now.
So just a plain machine that
Just plain,
okay.
It's called dress 4 sides. S4S they call it. 1 2x6 is S4S. That means surface 4 sides.
Yeah.
And I remember that. And now I've handled some heavy stuff through that machine. One time I put some 3x14s, 32 foot long, right from the saw, green. And you see, I had a balancing bar. You see, you had to pick these things, horses way back. You had to pick that thing up. You had to put it on a thing, get it up on this, so you go down to the machine. You had to pick that up and push it up by like this. You take a green 3x14, 32 foot long.
About shoulder high.
You see, it's limber.
Yeah.
You got to push it up and get it on that thing way down there in front. I stood way back here, and that thing was on there in front of me. Well, I guess I was about 12 foot or more from that deal. It had to be about halfway to balance it, put in the middle. And man, that's what I was doing just before I came over here to Broken Bow. Man, I could pick up a 500-pound bar and put it on my shoulder then. I didn't want to get on that.
Floyd Thompson, was that his name?
He was the general superintendent of all the mills.
Yeah.
He was the general superintendent of all the mills, like Wright City, Broken Bow, Dirks. That's all they had when I came here. He had 3 mills. He was the general superintendent. He happened to be down in Wright City. And he wanted me, he talked to me one time and said, why don't you go there and learn how to be a sawyer? You want to make a sawyer? Go there and get on that carriage. Man, I didn't like that carriage. The guy just got killed on it not long before then. And that carriage had been out the end of the wheel there 2 3 times. That steam getaway or something, it unlocked and zzz, boy, it just goes when you.
Is that what killed the guy?
Yeah. Slammed him against that wall down there and killed him. So I didn't want to get on that carriage, gets away sometimes.
So the sawyer was actually on the carriage?
No, the sawyer, there's not a, no, you've got to ride the carriage before you can be a sawyer. You've got to learn something about block setting.
Okay.
You got to know a little about the carriage before you can get over here and saw and know something about it. And then you graduate over here, you can learn to be a sawyer. Well, when you just do a little, go in there and when the sawyer's off, he'll show you a little long at time when you train the sawyer, you see. So I didn't want that. I could have made a lot bigger money and better, but I didn't like that deal. So the next time I saw him over there, he said, why don't you come over to Broken Bow? Why don't you start in? He had an office, an old boy over there doing an office boy or something. He's loafing around. He wasn't doing what he wanted to do. He said, come over there. We'll put you to work. I'll put you to work in the office over there. And I said, all right. So I'd have to start down at the bottom again. So I said, all right, I'll be over and see about it. So I went over there and started in to work at the office over here. That was in December 1921, December the 7th, 1921. And well, when I first came over here, they didn't have no boarding house or anything to go to, so we had an empty room upstairs in the office. It was a two-story building. It had a heater and a laboratory in it. Already had a laboratory up there in that room and a heater. So the office manager, Harry Neese, he went downtown to down to furniture store. We bought a bedstead and a mattress and a blanket or something. So I just stayed upstairs. So that, in other words, the room didn't cost me nothing. Oh, I did. I had to pay out that old bed I was sleeping in. I paid that out in a little while. I bought that on credit, of course. I didn't have no money in my money. So I bought that thing, paid it out. And it wasn't long. As soon as I got a job making some money, well, I boarded and roomed over town at different places. But kind of a slow go for a while until I got up to where I could get a pretty good job. Well, I was office boy, I guess, for about, I don't know, about 6 or 8 months, nearly a year, and I finally got a job as a woods timekeeper.
Yeah. What does the office boy do?
He just went out to the mill, picked up the log scale, and delivered things out to the different foremen, put it on the desk, and pick up things and bring it back into the office. Mostly go out and get the log scale every morning. See, they had that log scale was laying there waiting for it. Yesterday's cut. They go out and also bring in loading tickets from the shipping office too. Bring them back in here for the lay them on the invoice clerk's desk so you start billing them out. And go out and pick up billings and different things like that. And the one thing, clean up the office every morning. And used to have them old cusper doors in, and big old shiny brass. I know Mr. Folsom, the timekeeper, said, be sure to keep these clean, or Mr. she'll get on you if you don't keep them clean. I said, okay, all right. I had a hydrant out in the backyard. I'd take them things out there at the hydrant and turn the hydrant on and wash them out. That's when they used to use them. One old man used to spit in them things. They were nasty to clean up. But they finally done away with all that stuff. You don't see that anymore in the office.
When you were in Wright City, did you live in a dormitory type or bunkhouse?
No, I lived they had a big hotel there, a big two-story hotel.
So it was a hotel there?
Hotel. I lived in the hotel. I had a room upstairs.
Private room? Private room?
Yeah, private room. Nobody. Had a private room, and we had the dining room downstairs where they fed them all. The more I could eat down there then. I could hear them navy beans hit the plate, but man, I could eat them up real good. I could eat then, man, I gained weight feeding that big machine. I came there, I weighed 150, and I left there, I weighed 180 pounds. Doing that tough work, but that didn't make no difference.
At Broken Bow, where'd you take your meals?
Well, Jim Cafe is where I first started. A little cafe down here on the corner. I bought me they sold a meal ticket by the week. I think I paid $10 a week for a meal ticket, 3 meals a day. Sometimes, I guess it's about $10 a week. I eat my meals down there. Then I roomed out at different places. I think my first, where I first roomed out, I think I roomed up at, Hoyt Laster, he was a sawyer. I think I roomed at his place a while, and I moved over town, moved at different places.
After you were office boy, what did you do? What kind of job did you have?
I went keeping the the log record and the woods payroll.
Now what is that?
That was about 6 months after I was there. That was long in 1921.
Okay, what were your duties?
Well, it was, they turn in the time sheets. One of them was the woods and train, the train crew, they turn in a payroll on the train crew, and the woods, and the other sheet was a scale sheet. They scaled the logs out in the woods and sent that in on a sheet. See, it was scaled, and I had to add that up and post it on here and figured out so much 1,000. And they were in pairs then, that's when they had the old crosscut saw. 2 men. You'd add up the scale, divide it by 2, multiply it by the price per thousand. And give each one equal pay there. There's 2 men, so they got, say if they cut 5,000 feet, so much 1,000. I think back then, I don't know what they was paying 1,000, it's pretty cheap. But they were making, say if they was making $3 or $4 a day, that was good money then. That was good money then. That's what I was doing, adding that stuff up and then posting the time for the railroad crew, the engineer and brakeman. And they had an old, what they call a night hostler. He's the one that fired up the locomotives at night. When they park them at night, well, this guy'd come out early the next morning and get the locomotive ready to go out. He'd have to go down there and build the fire and get it ready. And they had a deal back on one of the cars. It was a deal that handled it. It had a crane on it. It was run by it was a steam rig, and it followed the track right down it'd go down the track and load these cars, see? Reach out over here and get the car. Kind of a crane-like deal. Yeah. And it's run right down the track on top of the car. So they go from one car to the other. They started loading on the back end, and he'd keep backing up till he got up to this end. He was a big, tall deal. I bet they've got some pictures of one back there somewhere, loading those trains.
Okay,
log trains.
Okay, log trains.
Yeah. Yeah, I forget what to call it. And he had to keep that thing ready to go. He had that fired up, the engine fired up. He had to have that ready to go by a certain time in the morning. So when they come out to get it, well, everything was ready. They had a man to operate this crane. Then they had a brakeman and an engineer. About 3 with the train crew.
How long did you work in Broken Bow?
Well, I worked in Broken Bow from December 7, 21 to December 31st, 1967.
1967?
I retired December 31st, 1967. I was 68 years old.
What did you do? What was your main jobs?
I was office manager then when I retired. Well, all I do is I had a certain amount of stuff to look after. I had to be responsible for getting out the material, see that stuff got out there on time. And somebody quit, I had to look out and try to get somebody else in their place.
How long did you?
Sometimes it's a pretty rough time, but we finally made it.
How long did you work as office manager?
Well, from the guy Harry Neese, the one just before me, he died in May 1938. So that's when I took the office, May 1938. And until I retired in 1967.
What did you do between posting the time and becoming office manager?
Well, I was invoice clerk in there. That was when I was invoicing this lumber, all that lumber that went out through there. I was invoice clerk from about 1924 until I was office manager in 1938. Then I had somebody else. I got another man to do the invoicing while I was looking after the other part of it. But man, you had one of these little comptometers. They've got one right back down here. I let them have it. Do this figure on it. I run through as much as 5 million feet a month. About 3.5 million pine, about 1.5 million hardwood. That's when that thing's running day and night.
How many?
I did all that by myself, that invoicing. And I've run that through there month after month and never make as much as 5-cent error in those invoices. And not recheck, just figure one time and that was the answer. With that little old machine. Now, I'd use it so I could tell when I made an error. See, that machine will tell you when you make an error, it'll lock on you. If it locks, you got to remember what key you punched and go back and pick that up. A lot of times I could just go back to that key without even having to go back all over. But if you're familiar with your machine, it's in good operating condition, you don't have any trouble. You can just run right through that thing. And man, some of that they finally got used to. It just figured the freight off on the whole thing. Now they finally broke that down into little old short pieces. Like you start out with, you keep your 2 foot and shorter, and then different lengths shorter down. I mean, 10 to 12 and 16 to 20. Break it down like that. You had to figure the freight off on each different section. You had an old box over here where you posted this stuff by length and grade and everything. And you had to keep that thing posted up, but some of the others done that. I just done one figure and run it through. So you had to make out an invoice. You made it out with an old indelible pencil. Mm-hmm. We send the original invoice in to Kansas City, where they rechecked it and billed the customer. And then we made what they call these impression books. It was a little old thin tissue. It's a book that holds, I don't know, maybe 200 pages of invoices. Mm-hmm. I think it's about 200. And it just had a thin tissue paper. You put your invoice down and put a sheet, a little damp sheet on top of it. And then we had a compression thing over here. You put it in and squeezed it down, and then you took them out. And you took them out, each sheet had an imprint of the invoice. Now that's what I was looking at upstairs, them old imprints, them old invoices back there.
And all those were burned up?
Oh yeah, they all burned, gone.
Who burned them all up?
I think when the warehouse I took, it was stacked upstairs up there, all that stuff in that old office. They burnt all that stuff up. Old Reed Thomason, he found one of them old books. He got it up here now. He kept it a long time, but he turned it over to this Heritage Center. Mm-hmm. It showed some of the rates. I think it's a book back in 1937 when we first went on Social Security. That's keeping record of everybody. Yeah. They're in that book.
When Wright City first opened, how many feet were they cutting a day in 1909? Any idea?
I have no idea. They had lots of men working there then because they had a lumber yard. A lot of that stuff was stacked on the yard as air-dried lumber. And then, of course, they run it through the kilns and into the dry sorter and back to a lot of that come from the kilns all come back to the planer. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times it come right off the yard. It had to stay on. You got to air-dry it at least 90 days. Then you run it back through your machines. Air dry. We used to ship it air dried as well as kiln dried. They ship air dried lumber, kiln dried.
You have much trouble with the lumber warping with air drying?
Well, now, not with the type lumber that's cutting in those days. Now, this type you got now, this old second growth, now it'd warp bad. Air dried. You'd have to kiln dry and keep that thing under pressure. And then it's pretty bad.
How come the old lumber wouldn't warp?
All right, the old lumber, the big trees, if you'll notice some of the center, the great big trees, say 4 foot in diameter, had about a 3-inch limb of sapwood, and the inside was heart. Now that heart never, it held its own. Now you take that heart lumber and it'd stay out here in the weather and never rot. That old other pine just rot and just go away. The weather would ruin it. It would rot and deteriorate. But the heart pine, it would last. I know back at home, we used to cut down them big trees and make shingles out of them. Cut shingles out of that heart center. Well, them roofs would last for a long, long time. That heart shingle. And they'd split off. I know when I was a kid, they split the shingles out and put on the house.
Use a froe?
Yes, sir. Use a froe and then split them shingles. You betcha.
When you started working there in 1920, how many feet were they cutting at Wright City?
Oh, 1920, I just have no idea. I imagine in an 8-hour shift, I guess they were cutting around, I don't know, imagine 80 to 90,000. Something like that. I don't know them because I wasn't keeping up with the scale back in those days. I know we used to run about 3.5 million feet through this mill over here a month, just on,
As a broken bow?
at the Broken Bow Mill. That's when I was handling the lumber and invoicing and inventory and all that stuff.
Who are your biggest customers?
Well, we had a lot of customers in Oklahoma. We had customers in nearly every state, I guess, all up Indiana, eastern states. We had a lot of customers in Oklahoma. Like, we had one customer, Southern Lumber Company. They're kind of related to them. They had a yard in Oklahoma City. And I don't know, just a lot. We shipped a lot of lumber in Oklahoma. Now Texas, we didn't ship. We had so many mills in Texas, back down East Texas, down in there. We didn't ship too much to Texas. However, we shipped quite a bit. But most of our lumber went up into the central states, and Indiana, Illinois, Tennessee.
Yeah.
We shipped nearly every state in the Union and Canada. We shipped a lot of lumber to Canada.
How did Dirks clear cut?
No, Dirks didn't clear cut. They had what's called selective cutting. They cut that timber down to, I believe it was about a 9-inch. Of course, I imagine John Burwell told you about that. I imagine most of their timber was cut down to about 9 inches. And a lot of the land had pretty good timber on it. When you got through cutting it, they clear cut it down to they left a lot of seed trees. And some of that timber was big timber. When you cut it off, it's almost clear cut. There wasn't no small stuff in there. Mm-hmm. And they'd leave these big seed trees, and then they started a reforesting program, I guess back in the 1950s, somewhere in there. Reforestation. Mm-hmm. Old John's got it in there. It tells you exactly when.
How does Weyerhaeuser and Dirks differ in their cutting methods?
Well, Weyerhaeuser clear cuts. They cut everything, I guess you know how they cut, you've seen it. They cut everything, and they say that's the only way that you can grow timber now. Is they use this fast growing, they've got a new deal in pine. It's a fast growing pine. Not only that, but I think they use a little fertilizer somewhere in that. I'm not sure. And it's fast growing stuff.
What kind of pine is it?
Oh, it's yellow pine.
Yellow pine?
It's yellow pine, southern yellow pine. And that stuff will, I don't know, just a little old place between here and the Queen, out here just the other side of Eagletown. Just a few years ago, you couldn't even see them out there where the grass was growing. And now I think they're about 9, right at 10 years old. Man, some of them things as high as that ceiling up there.
Huh.
There's good pulpwood timber in it right now, almost. Mm-hmm. In 10 years. See, in 10 years, in 12 years, you got a good pulpwood, and that's what, in the future, that's about all you get. They ain't gonna have but one sawmill in the future. I'll say, it's just my idea about it. And the rest of it will be paper, and stuff like this Craig plant, that board to make out there, and they'll have one sawmill. They don't even have much now the hardwood, all the hardwood they got now, they have a little hardwood. Most of it's chopped up and go down there to that Valiant paper mill. Mm-hmm. Boy, that paper is going to be the thing in the future. You look at the number of boxes and stuff they make now. Everything comes in a box, paper. Anything you buy, almost from a needle to an automobile.
Now, do they recycle down there at Valiant?
Yeah, some of that stuff
They
goes
get
back.
in
Some of that stuff goes back to
paper and recycle it with the new.
Well, I don't know whether they do that exactly or not. Into that business, I don't know about that. But when they first started up, it was just using pine. But now you see they put in they make a type of corrugated paper down there now. That what to make these paper boxes out of. makes the box stronger, corrugated stuff. And they have one of those units at Valiant. And of course, when they've done that, you can put in a lot of this hardwood in that. Hardwood will mix in with the pine to make that corrugated. Now, of course, just regular craft paper, they don't put much hardwood stuff in there. That's a different unit. They got two lines down there.
Okay.
They've got what's called linerboard mill. And of course, they ship it off. They've got a lot of these box factories in different places put that box together. Now of course, warehouse, now like we was talking, now they do that reforestation, I guess you know about the way they clear cut that stuff off and burn it and then plant it. And they say you can grow lots more timber on a small piece of, you get more timber off your land in a short space of time by doing that clear cutting.
How long does it
And I
take?
could see that. Now, if it just quit burning them up around here, wild Indians or white Indians, quit burning these plantations off, after you spend millions of dollars and go in there and burn it up, a lot of workers lose their wages and stuff. Bad stuff.
Much trouble with forest fires around here?
What?
Much trouble with forest fires around
Yeah,
here?
a lot of forest fires. Just as soon as it gets dry and the wind blowing, you can just count on a forest fire.
Now, they deliberately set or what?
Why, a lot of them sit.
How come people set them?
Maybe some of it's a little sore, but right now, of course, a lot of them are a little sore about this spraying deal, I don't know what all. And some of them or maybe some of them got fired down the mill or something, they come back and get it out, take it out on warehouses by burning up the woods, because they just can't do this and do that.
Did you know the old man Dirks?
Yeah, I knew the old man Herman Dirks. That was Fred's daughter. Fred Dirks' his daddy, Herman. Fred H. Herman. I knew I just seen him once or twice. He was an older gentleman. Now he was Fred H. Dirks' daddy. Then I knew Fred's son, Fred M. Frederick M. Dirks is his son. That's one of the young ones. When I first went to work, he was probably just a young kid. I don't know whether he's even born or not when I went to work. Because Fred, when he took over, they were just young, just out of college when they took coming down here and kind of taking over a little bit. Because the older ones are getting old and they had to train the young. Now Fred M. and DeVere. Now DeVere was one of DeVere Dirks, is one of the older ones, and Herman Dirks and Fred Dirks. Now there's DeVere Dirks. He had a son. And Fred Dirks, both had a son. And those two boys, when they got out of college, they came down in here and started to work. They were just beginning to take hold by the time they sold out. They were just beginning to come down in here. That was in the early 60s.
Yeah. How well did you know Herman Dirks, the old man?
Well, I didn't know. I think I used to take my meals up to Charles Wesley, and I just saw him once or twice. I never did meet him, just to actually meet him. I didn't know him. I just saw him up there one time.
How come Dirks sold out?
Well, I don't know how it come by. Not exactly. I couldn't tell you that. I think it was just, there's lots of factors beginning to boil up. I imagine a lot of union stuff and a lot of this government regulations. I guess they just decided they'd pull out and let her. And another way, I'll tell you one thing, that there's going to have to be some big expansion, a lot of new machinery added in, and big expansion, like especially this forest deal. And they didn't want to. I just don't think they wanted to undertake that. They saw it coming, and they thought they'd get out while they could. Let a larger company get in and where they had more capital to handle. They did. I don't think they just didn't want an undertaking. That'd be my idea. I couldn't tell you just exactly, but I think that was it.
Yeah. When Weyerhaeuser took over, did they keep most of the old Dirks employees on?
Yeah, they kept quite a few of those ones on. Of course, they thinned out a bunch of them. They started kicking them off one at a time. But they kept quite a bunch of the old bunch on. There's some of them still on. Today, it was, when they took over, they're still here. A lot of them still working for Weyerhaeuser that was working for Dirks.
Did most of the people that work for Dirks, were they for the sellout or against it, or?
Well, I couldn't tell you that. In fact, all they were looking for, I don't know. Of course, I imagine, no. I don't know just what they would think about it. I would think that, well, of course, the average workman, there wasn't nothing he could do about it.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd have that. Some of the management might have been a little disappointed. I'd say in the management team. Because you don't know, you wouldn't want to change it like that, switch over. You didn't know who it was. You just had heard of them, but you didn't know just what you were going to do, or what they were going to do with you, or what method, how they were going to do this and that. So I'd say that some of them were probably against it. But there wasn't no strong opposition because they didn't have nothing to do with it. Because the Dirks got ready to sell, they sold.
Yeah.
They were strictly up to the Dirks family, the directors, and so they were. Dirks wasn't a stock company. That was an individual capital.
So it was family owned.
That's family owned, no stockholders. But Weyerhaeuser's got a lot of stockholders in their company. A lot of stockholders. So, but Dirks is all family owned, and they just got the heads together and sold out.
How did the depression of the 1930s affect Dirks and the forest industry?
Oh man, they went into the hands of receivers during that. You know, it's like a lot of the other big companies did. They went into the hands of receiver. I don't know what year it was, but it's in the 30s. And Herbert Dirks is one of the directors of the company. So they appointed him as Herbert Dirks and Walter A. Graff, trustees. And if they finally, Herbert Dirks, and through his management, and of course Walter A. Graff was one of the creditors, I guess, that helped them pull out. They finally pulled out. They got out. They pulled out all right, made it out. Got all their debts paid.
How'd they pull out?
By paying up all their debts, I guess. They've done it in their business operations. Paid off their indebtedness. See, when they went into receivership, they owed too much. They just couldn't operate. So in order to operate, they just went into receivership to keep going, hold the thing together during the Depression when everything just about, well, this thing over here didn't run but about 2 or 3 days a week, down to about 10 cents an hour or something like that.
How about World War II? How did that affect Dirks?
Well, World War II it didn't bother them then. They were doing real good through World War II. We built a lot of stuff for the Army then, shipped a lot of lumber, we shipped nearly all the lumber, build these camps down here around Paris. They had a big camp. We shipped lots of lumber down there from our mills. We went down there to build that camp. And the other camp, lumber business was really zooming then, building these camps. All lumber, not brick, mostly lumber. That is good business for lumber companies then. Government money too. Good stuff. And we built a lot of what's called bum crates out of pine right here in Broken Bow.
What are bum crates?
It's a frame. It's a little wooden frame made to hold one of these bombs. One of the bombs they flew over there in Germany.
Oh, bomb crates.
A bomb.
Bomb crates.
Bomb. No, not a bomb. Bomb. I mean bomb. Bomb. And it's to hold that bomb, see? It's built just to hold it. So you had to have something to keep them slapping together and bumping so much. So it had a wood frame around it. We built those things for the Army. And Army and Air Force, mostly the Army. Army Air Force.
What did Dirks have camp houses, camp
Yeah,
towns?
yeah, we had these little camps out here. They've had them in different places. We had one when I came here, they had one out at Eagletown. They had one up north of Wright City. They had two camps when I came here. One was called, this is called Cleabit, out here north of Eagletown. That was Cleabit. Then they had one up above Wright City called Elixir, A-L-I-K-C-H-I, Elixir. That's Wright City camp. Then they've moved them around at different times. One time they had them up here at Honubby. They had a camp up at Honubby. And they first, this camp out here, I've seen that stuff cut over nearly 3 times. When I first come, I was doing some of the first cutting out in there in 1920. And they had a camp out there then. And then later on the second cutting, they moved the camp back out there again. Back out almost the same place.
Where do the people live in?
They lived, well, a lot of them, of course, lived around Eagletown, and of course, a lot of them they had camp houses around there too. They built houses for them to live in.
How big were the houses?
Just a lot of them were just shotgun type houses. About 3 and 4 rooms. They rented for about $2 a room. A 4-room house cost you $8. $8 a month. That's what they paid for house rent back in those days.
Now, how big were these camp towns or whatever?
Oh, I don't know. They just drew a house in the commissary. They had a commissary there at each camp. It wasn't very big. You know, just about, I don't know how many houses they'd have there. Probably have about, I don't know how many, 15 or 20, maybe 20, I don't know how many houses. Probably 20, 25 houses, something like that.
Were they all modern?
No, they wasn't modern. They were outdoor toilet stuff.
What about water supply?
Yeah, they had well, deep well or well water, pump. They had now let's see, we had electric lights. They had electric. Now when they first had these camps out here, there were no electric lights. They just had a well with a pump, pump the water by hand.
What about the women like doing laundry, cooking for the families?
Yeah, they had to do it the old-fashioned way and had one of the old iron pots out there to boil the clothes in and hang them out on a line. That's what they done for the laundry. Well, they done that right here in Broken Bow since I've been here. We didn't have those houses over there. I know when I first moved in some of them houses, we had a big old iron pot out in the backyard. Maybe we used to hire a nigger woman to come up and do the laundry then. You can't do that now. No, so I can't find no help nowhere either. Yeah, I have a hard time finding help. No, we used to get some nigger woman to do the work then, get no big iron pot, and get you some wood, and you buy these cut-offs over here at the mill and build a fire around the pot. You have your good clothesline, run them through a wringer and hang them on the line. That was it. Now, most of my shirts, I'd take them to the laundry, to one of these commercial laundries.
Yeah.
I used to have one here, and then it died a bell. And one time, I had to take my stuff to the Queen.
Well, that's quite a ways from
Go to
laundry.
the Queen with my shirt. But boy, it wasn't long. That was when you had cotton. But when they put in the polyester and this other stuff in there, that done away with. You run them through your washer and hang them up and dry in just a little bit. Then come on these other laundries like you got now, and that done away with all that. All this stuff just goes through one of them laundromats now and comes out better than it did from the laundry.
That's right. Oh, let me see. What else do I want to ask you? What haven't we covered? What aspect of the forest industry?
What happened, what?
What aspect of the forest industry do we need to cover?
Oh, the forest industry.
Yeah. What about improving
Well-
trees? Have they done much in
Trimming.
improving trees? The type of tree they're...
Well, now, yeah, they've done quite a bit in that. Of course, I don't know exactly what they've done. John Burrell or some of these foresters can tell you about that. I know they've done something to improve the type of tree they're growing today than they used to. They know that fast-growing tree they've got now, selective type. I don't know, they're doing that quite a bit. But I don't know just how much, to what extent
Yeah.
that is, because that's in the forest department. I don't know what it's doing. You're a forester, aren't you? You were?
I used to be, yeah.
Now, what they're doing in that, I don't know. That's in this. Like John Burrell or some of those boys, or mostly like Dale Campbell. They can tell you, some of these boys that's working for Weyerhaeuser now can tell you what they're doing in that. I don't know exactly.
Well, I think we had a good interview.
What does that thing sound like? I mean, you got a playback?
Yeah.
I don't think my voice is very good.
What didn't we cover?
You didn't cover all the deal we have here at Broken Bowl. Now, you see, at Wright City, they had a store and a hotel. If a young man came in there to go to work, he had a place to stay, eat, and trade. If he came into Broken Bowl, if he didn't have relatives here, he's in a bad shape, wasn't he?
Yeah.
If he goes over here and works, he couldn't get no money until payday. And that sometime could be as long as 24 days before he got a penny. Payday was 15 days. So they made an agreement with the merchant share to put in, not to put in a store, if they would handle coupons. We would issue coupons and discount them at 5%. We would naturally have to have a discount to pay for all the work. It takes a lot of work. You got to buy them, handle them, and all that mess. You didn't make anything off of them. Just about broke even. So when you came here and went to work, you could come over to the office on that day, just as soon as you worked the day, come over there and draw out a little old book. They had a little type of coupon book. Get your day's wages, go downtown, you could buy something to eat, you could pay your board and room, and you get enough of them, you could, before payday, you want to buy some shoes or something, you go downtown and trade those coupons for merchandise. So you had a way to get by before payday got along, and then in between paydays. I know a lot of them that worked there, that worked for out there, would come over every day just as soon as we opened the window up at 3 o'clock in the evening and get that day's wages. That day's wages, every day that they worked. I know several of them that do that every day. They never seen the only check they saw was that little tail end of the dollar. See, we couldn't write a check for less, you couldn't draw coupons for the odd cents. That'd come out in even dollars. You always had 10 or 15 cents left over at the end of when you wrote out a check, there was a balance down there, 15 or 20 cents. That's all the check they ever saw. That's all they saw. So that's the way they had it. Some way, you've got to have some way of getting by, especially a single man, no family. Before you could get any money, you got to have a way, some way of trading. Even a family had to have some way. He didn't have no money when he first landed. Till payday, and we don't advance none till payday. So we gave him the coupons. He'd come over and get coupons and go downtown and trade, pay cash. A lot of them would even give him cash because they knew he was going to get a discount. A lot of them would discount him at 10%. They'd go down there and want some cash. I know a lot of them would take him down there, old juice store down there. He'd charge 20%. You go down there with $1 book, he'd give you 80 cents for it. Well, he'd get 95 cents back.
Yeah.
And you'd get the 80 cents if you wanted cash. And some of them probably would maybe hold you up more than that, I don't know.
Right. How does, did Dirks have a better employee-employer relationship than Weyerhaeuser?
Well, see, Weyerhaeuser is more of a distant company. I mean, they're not as close. Dirks used to be more of a family deal. They were down in here quite a bit. She visited with Fred and Dirks. They always come down and visit around. I used to know Mr. Herbert really well. Used to eat breakfast with him at the hotel every time he's down here.
What kind of man was Herbert Dirks?
He is an easygoing type person. He was not fiery at all. He was very level-headed and very nice person to talk to. Mm-hmm. Herbert was.
What about Fred Sr.?
Fred Sr., he was a little on the high temper, a little flashy side. He had a little more zip to him than Herbert did. He's on a different. You might say it's a different bunch somewhere. I don't know. Their daddies are different, I guess. You got a history of them here somewhere. Mm-hmm. They are altogether different. Yeah. Herbert and they're just like two different people.
Were they brothers?
No, they wasn't brothers. Not Fred and... No, they were first cousins, I think.
First cousins.
I'd say they're first cousins. They sure didn't look alike.
Mm-hmm. Where'd the Dirks family come from?
From whose family?
The Dirks family. They come from Kansas City?
No, the Dirks family... I think their first, the old bunch landed in Iowa. And then they moved down to Broken Bow, Nebraska, and started in the lumber and coal business. That's where the Dierks Lumber and Coal Company name came from. And Broken Bow, Nebraska is what this town's named from Broken Bow.
Oh, it is?
Now the town of Wright City was changed during World War. The town of that was Bismarck until World War I. And then there's a boy, one of the Wright boys, a soldier, and got killed over during World War I. He was killed, and his name was Wright. So they changed the name from Bismarck in honor of this boy. Wright was his name to Wright City. Mm-hmm. That's where he got Wright City.
Well, Bismarck was a German name.
Yeah, that German name, Bismarck.
Yeah.
So they changed it in honor of the dead soldier. He was from Wright City. There's a Wright family lived there. I think his daddy used to be a saw filer there.
Yeah, how about sharpening files? How does that work? How do you sharpen files?
You mean sharpen a saw?
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, the saw, not the file.
Oh, they had my two brothers were saw filers. They had a big, thing, they set this bandsaw, I don't even know what a bandsaw would be. They put it up in this big frame, and then they had a little thing that pushed it along, and they had this little emery wheel. They would set it at a certain angle to cut that tooth just like they wanted. And it would move it, and this thing could do it automatically. It'd move it up, and that with these sets of wheels, cut that tooth just the right angle you wanted. And it would hit the top of it and cut it. And then you went over that with a swage by hand. You see when that tooth is perfect, you got to cut just a little swage on there so that saw wouldn't bind. It's got to be a little thicker than the saw. If it didn't, you couldn't get it sticking, it'd bind. So you got to have that little bit of turnout on it, flare it out just a little on the edge. You do that with a machine, by hand, squeeze it, and that bashes that out just a little. It develops a good hand grip doing that. You mess, and then not only that, they break a lot of them saws, and then they knock a lot of the teeth out. You got to weld that back in there. You got to know something about welding. You weld that tooth back, or you break that saw in two, you weld. Not only that, but you got to temper that saw. If that saw wasn't the right temper, it wouldn't run on that wheel. That saw's got to run with just the edge of it over that wheel just right. It's got to hold that wheel. If you don't have the right temper in it, so it'll stay there.
Now, what is this wheel?
The bandsaw wheel, where it runs up here, cutting the log, the big wheel.
Yeah.
You got to have the right temper so it'll stay on that wheel, right?
How do you temper the saw?
You temper it with a hammer. That's called, you hammer that saw, you hammer it out to make it, it's quite an art. You gotta know there's quite skill to it. Takes something to do that.
They ever sharpen the saws by hand?
You sharpen it with with an emery wheel.
Okay, but originally was it sharpened by hand or what?
No, it's always been an emery wheel with them saws.
Yeah.
Always been an emery wheel. You sharpen all them big old saws, the bandsaw, you sharpen with an emery wheel. And the only thing you do by hand, you swage it by hand and you hammer it by hand. You hammer to bring the tension in there, just the right tension.
Yeah.
In the thing some way. Then the welding, of course, if you have a torch, you got to know something about color and welding. Quite a bit to it.
Yeah. Well, anything else?
I guess I don't know. I don't know whether I've done any good or not. Maybe you got a little bit.
Oh yeah.
You have to take all this stuff and put it together and pick out what you want and line it up, make it look, make any sense to it.
Well, that's pretty good. We got almost an hour and a half.
Well, maybe we got a little something out of it. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Let's see, this is March the 12th, 1980. We're interviewing Bill Boyce, Bill Boyce, for Living Legends. And this is March the 12th, 1980. And what is your address, Mr. Boyce?
Broken Bow, Oklahoma.
Let's see, and your name is spelled B-O-Y-C-E.
Right, that's correct.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born near Magnolia, Arkansas.
And what year?
That would be September 1899.
And did you go to school there?
No, I went to school, and not in there. We moved to a different part of the state, still in Arkansas. But it was just a small country school.
Then how old were you when you began to work?
I was 20 years old. You figure that lost anyone, boy.
You were 20 years old when
20
you
years old when
began
we began to work.
And that was for the Wright City sawmill?
Yeah, that was for the Dierks Lumber Company at Wright City, Oklahoma.
And what did you do there?
Well, I was trucking cut-offs. That's little pieces of wood where the cut-off saws cut these boards that cut out the defects and truck them to a box to haul off, and they sold those for wood to the employees. Sold a lot of.
What were they used for, those small pieces?
Well, it's just refuge. Some of it went to the boiler room for fuel. A lot of it for people to use in the cook stoves in those days.
And then what was your next job?
Well, my next job was feeding a machine. That's a machine that planes lumber, cuts it down to a proper size.
Now that's the dimension machine?
No, that's a different type.
Oh, I see.
Just one. Then a little later on, I went to feeding this dimension machine. It was a high-speed machine, and handled
What did that do?
we handled lots of heavy timber on that machine. The size, it cut it. When it comes from the sawmill, it's not cut to the exact size. You have to run it through what's called a dimension machine, which brings it down to correct size, like certain width and certain thickness. And let's see, I went from
Is that a very difficult job?
Oh, that's a pretty hard job there. You see, that after I was there about nearly about 8 months, I guess, when they put me on that machine.
How many hours a day did you work at that?
Well, now, we worked 10 hours a day, and sometimes what they call, we went back at night sometimes and worked too. We worked,
What time in the morning would you start?
well, let's see, I think we started about 7 o'clock. I forget, we worked 10 hours a day. I remember that very well.
Those were
Maybe
long
started-
days, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, there was a long day. Started 7, and off about 6.
Then you moved to Broken Bow?
Yeah, and moved to Broken Bow. I came over here on December the 7th, 1921, and started in just carrying the mail, just right at the bottom, I might say.
About how old were you then?
Well, I was 22 then, 1921. I was born in September, 22 years old when I came over here.
Let's see, and then you did that for,
Oh, I did that. I guess I'd done that for about 6 months. And then they got promotion to, I kept a log record. The log record is keeping the record for the log cutters.
and did you do that in office, or was that outside?
No, that was in the office. I was in this office here at Broken Bow. I kept the log record for about, I kept that, several years. I believe it was 1924 when I took the invoice and billing job. That's invoicing and billing out the lumber.
Now,
to
that
our
was to customers,
Yeah,
huh?
that's to customers. The carload of lumber is about 25,000 feet. And sometimes you get 30,000 feet in a big car. But you had to invoice the lumber. You invoice that. You put a price on it. And we mail that to our Kansas City office at that time. And they would in turn invoice the customer with it.
I see.
And,
Then your next job, you went to,
my next job then was office manager. I took the office manager's job in, I believe that was in May 1939. Harry Neese used to be office manager. He took ill in about November 1938. He had a brain tumor, and he died in May 39, and I succeeded him as office manager. And I kept that job as office manager until December 31st, 1967, when I retired.
have you worked since that time?
Oh yeah, I'm still working.
Are you?
I work 2 hours a day.
What did
Yes,
you do
sir.
after you retired, then what did you do?
Well, first thing I did was do a little fishing. I really done a little fishing for a few years. But it wasn't long after I retired till Mr. Binger, he was a Conoco oil agent here, and he and his son run the agency, and he was getting old. He's about 83, and he's getting too old to handle the record, and his boy wouldn't do it, so he had wanted me to come over to see me and see if I'd take the job for him, keep his record. So I talked to him that year. He said, I said, well, I guess I can. I ain't got much to do anyway. So I said, yeah, I'll take the job. So I started working for him. Worked for him about, let's see, that would be 68. Yeah, 68. I worked for him till 71, about nearly 4 years. And then I went to work down at the end of the Trail Motel for a lady down there. They were way behind with their records and tax me. Boy, there's about 3-4 years behind with all that stuff.
Could you tell us something about when the Broken Bow office caught fire?
Yes, that was one of the exciting events that I had back in that. Well, the way that happened, I heard, I guess it was a little after 9 o'clock one morning, the fire whistle blew. They had a fire whistle downtown that would blow, when they had a fire. And I'd always call, see where the fire was. So I called the operator. I said, where's the fire? She says, you better get out of that building. It's going to burn down on you. Man, I told Harry, the office manager, Harry Neese, the office manager, and we ran outside and looked, and that thing was a fire. And man, we started throwing things out every direction down there. And first thing we done is put all the records and office machines in the vault. And then they started carrying drawers, and I mean, with papers in them, desk drawers, out them out there in a field. And man, the wind was blowing, that stuff just scattered all over the place around there. That's when some of those records got lost.
Was the vault fireproof?
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be fireproof, but it only just burnt the top off.
Actually, just burnt the roof off
the
the
roof
building.
off. Just burnt the roof off. So, I know that, like I was telling you a while ago, I don't know whether it was on tape, and about putting that roof back on, they started to work on that a little after 10 o'clock, and they had that roof. Started to work on that a little after 10 o'clock, and they had that roof on about the next day, about 2 days rather.
They had several people.
Oh yeah, we had all the people who get around, carpenters from the other mills. We had 3 mills at that time. One at Wright City, Broken Bow, and at Dirks, Arkansas. It didn't take long to get that back on there.
You had trouble then with your customers trying to
Oh yeah, they right.
You
They didn't want to know why they didn't get
lost some of these orders?
get certain additions, you know. A lot of times we get an order, you know, specified amounts, you know, and then they'd add to it. Maybe they wanted a few more pieces of different kind of lumber. They'd get the lumber and get the invoice, you know, unloading the car, and they couldn't find it, and they'd write back. Of course, everything happened on the fire. That fire done it. They'd write several times about that, won't know what happened to them. Of course, we'd have an excuse then what happened to it. Fire.
What year did you get married, Mr. Boyce?
That was in December 1932. And there's another incident that happened right after they got married. We have 2 mills here at Broken Bow. We have a pine sawmill and a hardwood sawmill. And I think about 6 months after they got married, the pine sawmill burnt down. There I didn't know whether it was going to be out of a job or what happened.
But it just right after you married?
Yeah, right after I got married. So it just so happened we had another mill, see? And they just used the other mill to cut pine and hardwood on the same way.
Did you have any children?
No children.
Could you tell us something about the trees they use in the hardwood mills?
Well, in the hardwood mill, we have several species of hardwood down in southeast Oklahoma. And one of the heavier type, most would be, we'd say, white oak, post oak, red oak. Then we have gum, we have sap gum and red gum, and have cypress. And
the hardwood doesn't include pine at all?
No, that's called a softwood. Really, cypress and pine is softwood, but we cut cypress on the hardwood mill, and we have cedar too.
That's on the hardwood mill?
That's on the hardwood mill, cedar, and even sassafras, hickory, pecan, and a lot of the oak. We put in a flooring plant there after the pine mill burned. We installed a flooring plant and made hardwood flooring. And the hardwood flooring is made mostly out of the red oak and white oak.
What kind of trees did you have more of in this area?
Well, we had more oak and gum, and the gum was mostly in the river bottoms. Of course, a lot of hardwood up in the hills. But,
the gum is used for woodwork, and the oak's used for the flooring?
They use oak for flooring, and a lot of the gum is used in trim work. A lot of windows. I guess they use that in a lot of windows and doors like that. A lot of gum.
And the molding
Yeah, molding. We used to make a lot of gum moldings and trim like that around there.
It's beautiful, I think.
Yeah, use a lot of that.
About what did that sell for back at that time?
Well, it's different prices. A
Is
little
that
bit hard
by
to.
the truckload, is that the way that
No,
was?
they'd sell that by the 1,000 board feet.
I see.
We sell so much per 1,000 board feet, so you sold your lumber. When it's manufactured into lumber, it's sold at 1,000 board feet. And way back there, prices were real cheap. By the
You
time I
sell to
retired.
lumber yards, that's right?
What?
You sold to
Yeah,
lumber
we
yards?
sell to lumber yards. Ours is strictly a wholesale.
Mhm.
Real wholesalers, not retailers. However, we did have some retail outlets. We had one in Kansas City, one at DeQueen, one at Hot Springs, Arkansas.
This was sent by railroad?
Yeah, we sent by railroad. Most all their shipments were by rail then, no trucks. But back there, was very little trucking. We didn't have roads for them. Couldn't do much trucking. I guess. I don't know. About this.
Could you tell us a little bit of the difference in the oak flooring?
Yeah, now the oak flooring, our best grade of oak flooring is clear. And the second grade would be select, then number one common. Number one common would have a few slight defects. And then number two would be more defects. And number three would be real coarse. You wouldn't want it for a floor hardly. And
Was it difficult to get that finest grade?
yeah,
Was that in abundance or?
No, not in abundance. It takes awful good timber to make clear oak flooring. And when the unit first went in, we had a lot of good trees to select from. We made plenty of it then, but you just don't get it anymore now. We made a lot of good. And oak flooring comes in, I believe we made two widths. One was about 2 3/8 inch wide, and another was 3 1/4 inch wide. Two different. Now you see a 2 3/8 is a little narrow flooring. Makes a little better looking
Using a
floor.
bowling alley maybe. Or,
Yeah, well they used maple, I think, in
oh,
bowling
that's
alley.
right.
I don't think we use oak in that. And
About how many grades were there?
well, is you have clear, select, number one, number two, number one common, number two common, number three. That's different grades. And of course, that clear oak flooring is just about a thing of the past. Now it's hard to get any. That's the reason we have so much concrete floors.
Did they make the parquet floor back in those days?
Parquet.
Parquet for in the squares, you know, the
Oh,
smaller.
we didn't make that. Now some lumber companies made those squares. We didn't make that type. Now we made
I know
one.
a lot of
they
the
called-
houses at about 40
We
years old
made
have
one type of flooring down there. They called it, it's kind of an antique floor. We made it 6 and 8 inches peg flooring. We pegged it down with wood pegs.
Yes,
And that was kind of an odd
that's an
looking
expensive
stuff.
flooring also.
That's put in, make your house look like an old antique place.
Mhm.
Like the old floors used to be 6 inches wide. Like that. That's about all I know about the old flooring. Prices on it.
Well, we thank you very much,
Uh,
Mr. Boyce, for this interview, and
I need to be a good storyteller. I'm not too much on storytelling.
well, I think you've told us quite a lot about the lumber business. And we thank you very much.
Well, I'm glad to do what little I could, which is not very much.